Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Stack Overflow podcast. Today is a segment of Leaders of Code where we are chatting with tech leaders about the work that they're doing, the challenges, the customers, how they build great teams, how they're using AI, and so much more. My name is Ira May, and I am the B2B editor here at Stack Overflow. Today, I am joined by Peter O'Connor, who is our Director of Platform Engineering. How are you, Peter?
I'm doing great today. It's Friday. It's amazing.
So, Peter and I are chatting today with Ryan J. Salva. He is a senior director of product at Google, and he's responsible for developer tools and services there with a particular focus on AI assisted tooling. Ryan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. This is going to be fun.
So usually I ask folks to start out by giving just kind of a Cliff Notes version of your path to where you are now, like how you got started in this industry. I mean, what did you always want to be, involved with computers? Were you a technologist from jump? What has your path looked like to the role that you have now?
Yeah, and I'll take it. Like the nickel tour of it was. Let's see here. Back in 1983, I won my grade school coding competition for a lovely little game written in BASIC and fell in love with not just code, but creating things of all kinds. I think I probably won an art competition at some point as well. Fast forward by many, many years of school embarrassment and awkward situations. And I found myself out of university with degrees in philosophy, music, and critical theory, and kind of rediscovered code all again. So I've now been working with developer tools and services for about 25 years, working both in startups, some of them other people's, some of them my own, but then also working in big tech. So I worked at Microsoft for about a decade, where I led the Azure DevOps team. I led teams in Visual Studio and VS Code, as well as Microsoft's internal developer infrastructure team. So kind of the dev infra underpinning Office and Windows and Azure and all those other Microsoft brands that you know and love. Spent 4 years at GitHub, again running a bunch of different teams there. But probably the one that folks know best these days is my team incubated and brought GitHub Copilot to market. So brought that up from a tiny little experiment to kind of the juggernaut that it is today. And then a year and a half ago, I decided I wanted to see the world from a different window and switched over to Google, where I've been leading teams since then. So now my teams include everything from SDKs and observability to AI assistive developer tools with things like Gemini CLI, Code Assist, and Cloud Assist.
Peter, how about you? How did you get into this wonderful world of software and technology?
Sure. I'm glad I'm not the only one who's got like the old history myself. So I too started very early in my years coding in BASIC on some old computers and building computers. And I ended up doing a lot of like local development, like for fun, back when the words webmaster were popular and sysadmin were popular. I dialed into BBSs, right? And I loved it. And I just loved every part of it. Would go to LAN parties where I'd game and enjoy that, and got me really into tech. And I learned it on the side mostly because I ended up going to school for teaching and to be a chemistry, a big hard science nerd, mainly because I had bad advice where someone was like, yeah, you should not do your passion as like a schooling thing or you might end up hating it. I love chemistry too. So I taught for 12 years and I taught at the high school level, both computer science, chemistry, taught at the collegiate level, both chemistry and then later on computer science after I got my master's in computer science. Finally said that was bad advice. Let's get this done. And during that time, I worked contractual work where I did a lot of platform help for people. The goal was to get like tooling for developers that could make things like deliver their software faster, make sure they had a good developer experience. I did some tooling around my local governments where they had a lot of SCADA IoT style kind of infrastructure, and they had really trouble like managing it, finding it, being able to work with it, develop against it. So work with them for a lot, did a lot there. Left my full-time job when I was like, teaching's great. I love it. In fact, I miss kids to this day teaching them, but ended up landing at a local county school system where I did just everything. Did a lot more platform stuff there too. I mean, I did everything, including product engineering, but that's where I really started learning. Like I love infrastructure, back to the infrastructure. I was builder from day one. I'm a builder today. That's where, I started trying to learn a little bit more about Kubernetes. Became very proficient with Kubernetes, learning how like to develop and provide platforms that other developers could just go and rock with, so they could just get value out the door. And I love that. Like I loved it when the developer was my customer. And then after a while there, I landed here. So I landed at Stack Overflow as a platform developer. And that story went from starting as a platform developer, then line managing the platform developers, and then slowly going up to director, where now I lead the platform engineering team at Stack, where right now we're trying to go through the early form of a platform where you have all the pieces together, and now it's about enablement, right? Getting people to connect with each other, have the right contracts, make sure that you're getting, values getting out the door, and you're enhancing their ability and having good user experience, right? Because they are your customer, and making sure you vibe with that really well. So I actually have a lot of thoughts that I want to ask Ryan, because I've been thinking a lot about how AI is almost a new CLI tool for developers, I think, especially in platform engineering. So but yeah, that's kind of where I've been, what I've been doing, and what I'm interested in. So
Some serious nerd cred, dude. I love it. I love it.
let's just start with your like vibe on AI in the developer flow. Like, where has it been and where do you think it's heading? What is it going to be doing for us and developers in the future?
I think it's sometimes helpful to briefly look back at where we've been to understand where we're going. So figure we've had large language models as part of the general zeitgeist for about 5 years now or so, roughly. We started with predictive text, so a little bit of ghost text in the editor, just to, effectively anticipating what 2 to 10 lines or so might be ahead of where you could type them yourself. That saved us a lot of keystrokes, I suppose, in the IDE. That evolved into chat, so effectively asking questions maybe about the file that's in front of me, sometimes just to grok a little bit about what's going on, maybe to write a little bit more. Then over time, we started to get a little bit more sophisticated with React loops and multi-file editing, effectively using system tools like grep and read directory, ls directory, read contents, things like that, in order to allow the model to reason over larger code bases in order to perform those multi-file edits. And increasingly, I think like that's where I see most developers settle today. Now, they might be doing that inside of an IDE. They might be doing that using a command line tool like a Gemini CLI or a Claude Code, or just this last week, a Cursor CLI. But for the most part, I think folks still are getting comfortable and getting proficient inside of just using their normal kind of iterative process very synchronously at the laptop working. And when I look forward to the next year or two, let's call it, a lot of the conversations that I'm having with individual engineers as well as engineering leaders, and frankly, internal here inside of Google, is about how do we start to use AI to perform more semi-autonomous to autonomous actions. So it doesn't require a developer to necessarily be at the laptop in order to effect a change, but that we're able to automate away some of the work that is frankly eating up a lot of the just like the human time that it doesn't necessarily need a human to do. Because like if you think back a decade, actually maybe 15 years ago, when DevOps kind of became a thing, what DevOps was really trying to do was automate a lot of the kind of the build and deployment activities that were eating up a lot of engineering time that could have been better devoted to actually writing code and building out new capabilities and new features. Today, what I see is the next kind of turn of the crank on a lot of that automation, except this time through AI. So to maybe spark your imagination and give a couple of examples here, within my team, we now by default use AI to do all of our issue triage and to do a lot of our code reviews and to write of our internal engineering documentation and even to write out and perform some of the manual tests. Actually, here's a funny digression and story, but I'll give a good example of using automation with AI. So not an engineering thing, our docs team, right? Folks who are writing documentation actually for public consumption. So still technical documentation, but for the world. My product teams, my engineering teams were starting to move a lot faster. this is all good stuff. We're shipping more frequently. We're delivering new capabilities. And we were being irresponsible. We were being bad. We weren't telling our docs team about all the new things we were shipping. And so they were getting frustrated because they weren't able to keep up with the pace of change in the engineering team because we weren't being good communicators. And when we ship new things and there's not good documentation, that clearly creates a bad end user experience. You don't want that. So our docs team were like, all right, screw y'all. We're going to write some manual test cases, some like manual testing, UI testing for the product. And our docs team, they're not engineers. They're technical, but they're not engineers. So they ended up using AI to write a bunch of like Selenium tests to go out and look for product changes that we failed to tell them about within the product team so that they could then go and know when they needed to write documentation. So it was essentially their way of providing a checksum, as it were, against was their documentation reflecting the current state and the current behavior of the product itself. They weren't testing product quality, they were testing doc quality indirectly. It's these types of automation, whether that's in the docs team or it's in the engineering team, that I think everyone's trying to bring into the software development lifecycle, because it's not just about can we write code faster? It's really about can we ship software faster? And is as maybe sometimes infatuated as I am personally with the act of creativity that comes with writing software and writing that code, the fact of the matter is that was never really the bottleneck for shipping software. The bottlenecks were all of the other things surrounding it. It was the operation of the software in production. It was the deployment of it. It was navigating the deployment failures. It was the documentation that was around it. It was the managing the backlog and kind of like figuring out which work is important versus less important. And so you ask kind of where do I see this going over the course of the next couple of years? I see us filling out a lot of the space around code authoring itself with more AI, both to help with automation, but to help make sense of all of the work that's around it. The other thing that I see happening, and I see this with my teams today, I've been working in big tech now for 16, 17 years, something like that. And big tech, well, it's big tech. Lots of people, big teams. We're talking engineering teams of 1,000, 2,000 folks in order to manage these large services. The thing that I'm starting to see really just this year is that teams that used to be organized around 30 to 60 people to deliver a single capability or a single service are starting to break down into smaller components. Now, that's not to say that the overall developer population is shrinking. We actually still employ the same number of engineers, and actually that number is overall increasing. But whereas they used to be organized in groups of dozens, we're now starting to organize into teams of 3, 5, right? Much, much smaller teams, because these smaller teams are able to produce a lot more. They're able to work through their backlog more quickly. They're able to, experiment and iterate with new capabilities. And so part of this is about the technology, but part of it is also about the way that we organize our teams. And as those teams are able to shrink, there's a few consequences that come out of that. One, there's less collaboration tax, right? I'm sure, Peter, you got to deal with this all the time in your role at Stack Overflow. The more people you pile onto a problem, you got to get everyone on the same page. Everyone's got to talk it out and argue, and then they got to hug it out. And then they've all got to get to some kind of common shared understanding of what they're building. But trying to get 15, 20 people on the same page is very different than you and, the person sitting next to you, or, maybe 2 other people. And so when you're able to have higher bandwidth conversations with you and just a couple of collaborators, that is what allows you to move much more quickly. It allows you to be more agile and more nimble in the way that you react to new information as you're shipping these capabilities. And so part of this is a technical journey. Yes, absolutely. But part of this also is a journey in how we change the way that we organize and that we partner with the engineers and the product managers and the designers and all the people that are responsible for shipping software to work together.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. You definitely hit a big thing for me where I have long since said that, the bottleneck in value delivery is never the delivery of code. It's everything else. And no one believes you for a while. And then you're like, you put the metrics and you're like, well, this thing stayed in the backlog for a month. Well, no wonder, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we kept changing priorities. What do you think? It's crazy. So like, I hear you, and it really means a lot to me to hear you talking about like how we really find teams smaller but are nimble and agile, because that's what we've always wanted, right? We've always wanted to be more agile and pivot. I love hearing that, and I also love hearing like we're not likely to produce developers that we're going to see in the world. I kind of agree with you on that. Like the problems we still have, they're too many. There's still too many problems out there.
Totally.
So
I mean, like every team I've ever worked with, right? We've got, whether you do quarterly planning or continuous planning or semester planning, choose your poison here, right? But like every team's got a backlog that's a mile long, right? And
Yep.
in Gemini CLI, what we're shipping right now, dude, we've got like 1,000 incoming issues every week of some of them bug fixes, some of them feature ideas, some of them dupes, all this kind of thing. But like either way, there's a backlog that's much, much longer than we're ever going to be capable of shipping. And so, what often happens is we're playing a little bit of a game of chicken, right? Both with our leadership team, we say, oh, this month we're going to be able to deliver this much work. And we're kind of hoping that someone else screws up so that we have a good excuse for why we weren't able to deliver that much work, right? But also with our community and our developers, we want to be able to deliver all those new feature ideas and all those bug fixes to them, but there's just only so much capacity. And so what the AI is really doing is it's giving us a fighting chance in hell at actually delivering on our commitments each sprint or month, or again, pick your time unit here.
Yeah, that's the amazing part of it. I agree for sure. It's like it doesn't, I don't want to say we're 10xing because that's got a stigma to it, but like it does, right? It does help us go faster and reduces cognitive load in the areas of overhead and extraneous cognitive load that we don't need, right? Like I don't need to go back to my Jira task and mark it complete. Can something just do that for me?
Right. Or like all the
That'd be great.
dupes, right? I mean, we're
Yep.
talking about backlog management, like
Yep.
finding all the dupes, like that's a relatively rote task.
Yep.
And like if AI can at least bulk them all together and say, hey, this cluster of things looks to be all the same root issue, that clears a lot of the work from my engineers to then go fix the issue rather than do the paperwork, the bureaucracy, the
Yeah.
project management of bringing it together.
For sure, for sure. Let me maybe took your brain a little bit, maybe into my world. So I'm thinking about platform engineering. I'm
Yeah.
thinking it's awesome, right? Like you're doing all these cool things. It has been the one place where I found AI to struggle a little bit more because we're still struggling with things like, well, what cluster do I deploy to? Where do I get this key? Because I don't want I don't want this secret. I need a secret key specific to my application, or I want to provision this infrastructure, but like how and where do I provision it? I've been reading a lot lately how this like more of a CLI, approach to like interacting with systems now. Like, hey, these CLIs can help you automate a lot of these tools and platform engineering world needs. So, like, have you had a lot of experience in that? And like, where do you see AI help platform engineers?
Yeah. So there's a couple components to this. First, I'll say as an industry for the last 5 years or so, I agree. We've focused more on the code authoring than we have on the platform engineering, the DevOps piece of it, the connection to operation. And so I do believe that a significant amount. I talked about broadening out to beyond just code authoring to other pieces of it. DevOps and platform infrastructure and platform engineering are undoubtedly one of the next big frontiers of the next year for us. And so there's a lot of maturation or kind of improvement that we need to do there, but we are starting to crack into it. There's a few things that I think about there. So maybe first I'll start with standardization first, because a lot of what platform engineering is about ensuring that everyone is doing things in a consistent way so that you can manage the complexity of operations, so that when you fix a problem in one place, it gets fixed everywhere because you're relying on shared components and shared infrastructure. And so this is one of the places where historically I feel like we've, as platform engineers and leaders, we've only really had two tools that we could rely on. We could rely on essentially people and process, right?
Yep.
You could say, hey, everyone, here's our book, here's our standard operating procedure, here's our documentation that says here's how we do things within our organization. And then you would rely on people to follow the rules, to follow the platform. You might have some release gates in there and things like that where you tried to kind of shoehorn and make sure that everyone followed it. But even then, there was always a break glass option, and more often than not, and I love this about engineers, but engineers just care about getting the job done and getting a job done quickly. And if there's a way of hacking around it, they're going to do it if it helps them ship that software, right? And so one of the things that I think that AI equips our platform engineering teams with is a new tool to influence the standards and the patterns of operation. If we can use, and I think one of the ways that this is done today is largely through things like markdown files that get bundled with a repository or with the home directory. And so and I'll give an example. Since I was drawing from Gemini CLI earlier, I'll draw from it again. It's convenient. One of the things that we do there is Gemini CLI's got several markdown files that are in the repository. Because it is an open source project, we have contributions coming in from a lot of folks who aren't even part of the core team. That's a great thing. We want that. Yeah. Open source, you want folks to contribute. But it also means that all those folks outside of the core maintainers list, they don't know our processes by heart. They're just, they're open source contributors. And so those markdown files, we use those to influence the code that is written by Gemini CLI when creating a PR or a code change for Gemini CLI. And so that influences, hey, are they, always writing tests following the right patterns? When it writes out new classes and new methods, is it following the right architectural patterns? And so we're able to use the AI itself to influence both the code that's written as well as any of the tests and any of the documentation and any of the other process stuff that surrounds it. That is extremely helpful. That's the standardization piece. And there's another piece of this, which is now, how do we get the right connectivity to the tools for managing the deployment and the operations of it? And so here, a lot of that work, at least in the organizations that I've worked in, has typically been performed through some combination of CI pipelines. Maybe it's in an Azure pipelines or a GitHub Actions or something like that, but you got a CI pipeline. You've usually got some sort of command line tools that you're using, and then you might have perhaps some chat ops, which are effectively just invoking some command line tools on the back end as well, right? So they'll end up going through some kind of command line tool. So there's a few things that I found helpful here. One, I'm more of a coder than I am a command line kind of jockey. I can never remember all of the different, dash commands and the weird invocations that will get me the results that I need. I usually would just go to Stack Overflow and ask it to remind me what's the command for this, right?
Yeah, thanks for the plug. Appreciate it.
Yeah. I mean, it's true, though. It's true.
Yeah.
Increasingly, what I am able to find is okay, what if I ask AI to go out and just through natural language, I want to create a GitHub action that will deploy to this environment. And so now it's going to create the YAML for me to go do that. I've got a Node application. I want to deploy it to Cloud Run, Google Cloud Run, and I want to make sure that in doing so, here's my key vault, my secrets that I want to put out there. In a way, that's just another flavor of code authoring, but I'm using it for writing CI, CD pipeline definitions. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm using AI in the command line to invoke, all of the extra command line tools. So within Google's command line for interacting with Google Cloud, it's called G Cloud. And so there, I'm even worse. I'm less good at that one. Despite the fact that team actually reports up to me, I'm still find myself constantly needing to go out to Google, to Stack Overflow, elsewhere. We actually started playing around with recently, what if we just ask Gemini to write the command line invocations for us? And usually that would do a pretty good job based upon just the documentation and the training materials that's already out there in the public. The challenge is that the models are only trained on public data. So it may know the individual invocations, but it doesn't necessarily know about the resources that are available to you in the cloud. What's your project ID? What are the names of the clusters? There's a lot about your personal, your team's infrastructure and configurations that the model doesn't know anything about. And so either you have to feed that through a prompt, and this is where I think a lot of value, a lot of opportunity has been unlocked in the course of the last, MCP came out now 8 months ago, something like that. And so what we do is we just then create an MCP that connects out to, in this particular example, into Google Cloud. That MCP provides exposure to all the resources that your team has provisioned within Google Cloud. And so now when I say, hey, I want to deploy to this particular cluster, I think it was named something like Happy Pony, then it will be able to go out and ask the MCP server, okay, what are the resources that are deployed? Oh, it turns out it wasn't Happy Pony, it was Jolly Pony, but I found the right one. Did you mean that? And this enables not just people like me who aren't necessarily familiar with the infrastructure of my team, but also it opens up the possibility that I imagine this will be in the not so distant future here, probably in the next, difficult to predict, but I would guess in the next 2 years or so, we're probably going to be at a place where a lot more of our deployment pipelines, a lot more of our operations is not pre-configured and static, but is rather dynamically created at like just in time. Because think about this, when you've got let's say that you're deploying out a new feature and it's the first time you've ever done this particular change, you want to do a progressive deployment, right? So you want to go out to just 5% of traffic. You want to make sure that you can dynamically roll back if there's any variations in the number of errors that are thrown back, things like that. Really, if you want to respond to that quickly and nimbly in a way that doesn't necessarily, you don't have to have anticipated every particular eventuality. Allowing AI to just say, hey, I want to deploy this out to 5% of my traffic. I want to do it to this particular region. We'll do it to EMEA. And I want to make sure that it only hits customers of a particular cohort. Well, the AI can dynamically build out that pipeline, can dynamically build out that kind of cohort circle, right? That ring deployment. And it can also look at your logs, look at kind of the number of errors that are being produced and the kind of both the warnings and the errors, and respond to that and roll that back. All through, we talked earlier about more automation through agents. That's what agents really we want to be able to do for us. We want them to be able to not just do exactly what we say, right? I mean, it was never about translating, I don't know, not having to write in Java anymore, but being able to write in English with the same level of specificity. It was about being able to generally describe our requirements and then having the large language models translate those requirements into all of the specifics of an implementation. And that's kind of where I really believe that the platform engineering and the operations side of things is going.
Okay, so I have been Ira May. I'm the B2B editor here at Stack Overflow. If you ever have any suggestions for guests or topics that you'd like to hear covered on the show, you can always email podcast@stackoverflow.com.
I'm Peter O'Connor. I'm Director of Platform Engineering here at Stack Overflow. Best place to find me is on LinkedIn. You can find me at O'Connor Peter K, and you'll get me. A guy with a colorful shirt is me.
And friends, I'm Ryan J. Salva at Ryan J. Salva everywhere: LinkedIn, GitHub, X, developer, product manager, and whiskey enthusiast at large. I look forward to seeing all of you online. Also, please come and check out our open source repository, Gemini-CLI on GitHub.
Thanks, everybody. We will see you on the next episode of the Stack Overflow podcast.